Good afternoon, good evening. I'd like to mention an example from today for illusion, which is a symptom of the syndrome of rewards and punishment. The example is the terrible fires in California. This is something which wakes people up. If they're in the fire, I imagine they would be wakened. Oh yes, global warming is real. In case they were denying it, this would wake them up. And still there could be people who are not affected by the fires who still would continue to ignore all the signs of global warming until it comes personally to their doorstep. But my point here is that the way people wake up is usually when they are in denial, is when it's too late. Like we already have lost so much in those states to fire and all the other natural disasters. They're getting so huge and the losses are so huge that it's really almost too late to wake up. And this is what happens with illusion. People are in denial. It is not to their benefit that that they should admit that global warming is important and we should do something about it. They figure because, this is the way they seem to be figuring, because they make money from things that cause global warming, and they are addicted to money. And the reason that they see things that way, they only see what their reward is. The reward is money. They get more money if they deny global warming. They get less money if they admit it and start changing. What I'm saying is that this is caused in childhood by the way that they were trained in their youth and childhood. Usually a person's brain is developing especially fast, and if they are rewarded and punished a lot, they tend to develop a way of thinking which is there a reward or punishment in it? Well, then I will or won't do it, depending. And now the reality their teachers didn't bring in. The teachers didn't say, okay, you're not going to be punished, but look at what you're doing. They didn't say that. They said, don't do it because we're going to punish you, and never explained the reason you don't do it. So the child is trained to think about, or there's a reward over here if you do this. And they go with that when they're adults, and they do what they are rewarded for. So if your reward comes from making money from selling oil, maybe make a lot of money from oil. Then we have forest fires later on, but you never thought about those forest fires before they happened, or that you might be contributing to them. You're just going for the reward, which is immense amounts of money that the leaders in the oil industry make, which is a huge reward, which really isn't needed. It's an addiction. Okay, so that's what I'm trying to say. Okay, now I'll continue. The problem in the next section I'm talking about is there's a problem of separation, as this is one of the symptoms. The problem of separation or polarization is one in which those who make the decisions do not face the results of their actions. They are artificially separated from them. In the training of children, this takes place when the children do not realize what the results of their actions are. For example, a child who plays and messes up a room should see the mess and clean it up himself if he wants a neat room again. But if someone else does it for him, maybe he has a maid who does it for him immediately, he may not realize the results of his own actions. There is another type of separation, one in which those who cooperate with the dominant system and begin to dominate their fellows begin to become part of another culture, the dominant one, of overproductivity, the addictive one, addicted to wealth, while their fellows may attempt to continue maintaining their original culture, although it becomes more and more difficult as the new values and ways overpower the old. This separation causes segmentation and marginalization of poor populations and a loss in the strength of diversity. So the separation is between those who are being rewarded and are able to join that dominant culture. Then everything becomes like the dominant culture, such as worldwide we see shopping centers. Wherever you go, they're all the same. That's a lack of diversity, but that's the dominant culture. Then you get your diversity when you go into the poor cultures. They still have some of it, but they're losing. There's a big loss in the culture because they cannot sustain it, because they don't have the money that it takes to sustain themselves. So, for example, there's a great loss in languages. For example, in Mexico, in the poor areas where the dryness has made the poor people, they don't have enough water, so they have to actually leave their towns. There are some towns that are like ghost towns, and they go to big cities, but in the process, their languages are being lost, at least partially, if not almost all the way. Pretty soon, within maybe another generation, all the way, they could be lost. A remedy for the addictiveness found in so many aspects of the business political world is that of nonviolent non-cooperation. I went through that before, but part of the idea, King, now the next section is about unity. Martin Luther King stresses the unifying aspect of nonviolent non-cooperation. He notes the aftermath is reconciliation and the creation of the beloved community. His emphasis on nonviolence, in spite of the fact that there were other leaders of the time, black leaders, in favor of violence, show his resistance seeking of peace within their community on his own part. Gandhi's identity with the community was also an emphasis on unity. Although a leader, his nonviolent approach allowed identity with the people. Because he was nonviolent, he was not so high up and so high mighty that he couldn't identify with the ordinary people, with the community. In order for a group to resist effectively, there is also a need for unity. So in resistance, you have to have unity. In Brazil, a group of rubber tappers was severely tempted individually to sell their land, etc., to the big interests. But if they could maintain their unity, there could be some hope. If they could resist that temptation to sell their land, which would be the best economically for them individually. But if they could maintain that unity by saying no and suffering the consequences, there could be some hope for their survival. This is a type of non-cooperation. Part of the idea of unity is also the interrelatedness of all creation. This understanding points to a need for respect of creation, nature, or the environment, and not a separateness where we can exploit it without adverse reactions or repercussions. So if we exploit nature and then we leave and never see what damage we did to nature and to human beings in the process, and we see we get a great big reward for it, maybe we'll continue doing that. Jean-Bertrand Aristide describes the need for nonviolence because of the unity of all reality. When we realize we are part of one another, when we empathize, we don't want to win at the expense of the other. We empathize with him and therefore don't use guns or money to try to force our opinion on him. Instead, we want a win-win situation through nonviolence. Aristide saw the political and theological as interconnected. Gandhi also claimed the interconnectedness of those areas which so often are separated today. The politicians don't talk much about what is moral. We have to win that war. We do it any way we can. We have to, killing women, children, killing men, even men, killing anyone. We have to do it. We don't think about what any Christian leaders are saying. We're just going to go and do whatever it takes. And if we have to get that, win out over somebody else, we will. Or whatever, a very so-called realistic approach. But Gandhi claimed the interconnectedness which so often are separated: the social, the political, and the religious. He also believed that the spiritual is all tied up in other areas, not out by itself all alone for Sunday mornings. King didn't want the movement he led to be isolated from the whole community. So in other words, there are women's groups, there are all sorts of different poor groups. Not all women are poor, that's for sure, but there are poor women. There are many groups that are poor and trying to better themselves. He wanted anyone to be, he started the poor people's movement. Instead of saying black people, he said poor people at the end of his life. And that was shortly before he died. He was going to have the Poor People's March. That way he would seek the common good, not just of one interest group seeking to redress its ills to the federal government. In other words, not a selfish, we care about ourselves only, but joining the other groups. And this way he avoided being bought off or played against other groups, because what they can do is give a reward to this group and not give it to another one, and then they get mad at each other and pretty soon they're all divided up. But if they're all together and they care about each other, they can't be played as easily. This was similar to Gandhi's insistence on the common good of both India and Great Britain, not just that of India. In writing about the common good, Gandhi pointed out how it always demands a willingness to reach out to a larger reality, from the individual to family to another larger group, etc., always with a willingness to sacrifice the smaller if necessary for the larger. Okay, that's it for today. Thank you.